You weren't supposed to survive. Not emotionally, not mentally, not spiritually. They didn't need to bury you. They simply expected you to fold in silence. You were supposed to disappear beneath the weight of it all, crushed by doubt, dragged into ruin by the betrayal they swore wasn't betrayal. That was the plan. That was the unspoken wager they placed behind closed lips and fake smileless, that you'd be too broken to ever recover, that you'd self-destruct and save them the burden of accountability. They didn't have the spine to finish you directly, so they handed you the gun called isolation and waited for you to pull the trigger of despair. But you didn't. You broke the pattern. You didn't die. You dismantled. The psychology of survival isn't glamorous. It's not pretty. It's not loud. It's messy. It's lonely. It's so internal that even the people who love you don't always see the war raging under your ribs. They thought the silence meant you gave up. But really, you were rewiring. They mistook stillness for surrender. What they didn't realize is that survivors don't rise with dramatic exits. They rise in fragments. You collected every piece they shattered and rebuilt them sharper. You stitched together your heart with truth instead of approval. You replaced people pleasing with personal standards. And now they're staring at you in disbelief because your laugh echoes in places they thought would become your grave. You laugh now, not because life got easy, but because you realized your power. The laugh is not joy alone. It's armor. It's poetry forged from pain. It's the sound of someone who understands the absurdity of being underestimated and weaponized it. You laugh in a room full of people who once planned your exit, not mockingly, not out of spite, but because you see it now. You see them for what they are. And more importantly, you see yourself for who you really are, unbreakable. They don't know how to handle it, because your survival wasn't passive. It was an active, brutal, daily decision. And now your presence isn't just survival. It's retaliation without revenge. You didn't survive by chance. You survived by choice. That's the part they don't talk about. The part they'll never understand. How many nights you sat with yourself and decided to live, to push, to stand. Not because anyone asked you to. Not because it felt good. But because something deep inside refused to die politely. Your mind refused to collapse into the mold they built for you. That's why your survival is a threat. Not because you're still breathing, but because you're breathing on your own terms. You've become a glitch in their narrative. The character who wasn't written to last, but ended up rewriting the entire story. You're not laughing because you're petty. You're laughing because you're free. And freedom, to those still bound by the illusion of control, looks like arrogance. That's how the insecure process growth they didn't cause. They call it ego. They call it pride. But your smile isn't for them. It's for you. It's the grin of someone who made it out without losing their mind or their soul. They threw chaos at you and expected you to carry it forever. But instead, you recycled it. You learned from it. And then you built with it. That's why your energy disturbs them now. It doesn't just survive pain, it transforms it. Relationships taught you the hard way. Taught you that love without respect is poison. That connection without integrity is a trap. You stopped romanticizing potential and started reading patterns. You stopped giving access to those who confused proximity with loyalty. And when you finally pulled away, they panicked. Not because they missed you, but because they lost control. The version of you they manipulated is dead, and the one who replaced it, that one laughs without explanation. That one doesn't explain trauma to people who caused it. That one walks into the room like they own it, because after surviving hell, everything else is just scenery. Survival taught you discipline. It taught you silence as strategy. It taught you detachment as medicine. You don't chase peace anymore. You embody it. Your boundaries aren't walls. They're filters. And the air on the other side of them is cleaner than ever. Now you understand that not everyone deserves to sit beside your healing. Some people belong only in the lesson. And while they were busy watching your collapse, you were quietly becoming someone they need to Google to understand. You're an entirely different species now. Evolution did that. Pain did that. Self-respect did that. Now you laugh because nothing they say can reach you. You walk like someone who was supposed to disappear, but chose to dominate instead. Not dominate others. Dominate yourself. Your fear. Your past. Your pattern of shrinking when someone raised their voice. You no longer explain your silence. You no longer negotiate your value. You laugh now because you see it clearly. The survival was never the finish line. It was the beginning. The beginning of becoming someone so rooted, so grounded that even betrayal becomes background noise. They built traps. You built boundaries. They told stories. You built a legacy. They expected an apology. You gave them your absence. They aimed for the part of you that still believed in them. That delicate, dangerous piece of you that gave too many chances, that stayed too long in rooms laced with quiet betrayal. They didn't need weapons to kill that version of you. All they used was silence when you needed reassurance, absence when you needed presence, and manipulation dressed as affection. It was slow, intentional, drenched in performance. And that version of you, the one they cornered emotionally, gaslit into submission, squeezed into compliance, was supposed to die. That was the outcome they craved in your collapse, internalized, your retreat disguised as maturity, your light dimmed just enough to keep you harmless. But something unholy happened. That version of you didn't just vanish. It woke up, and not as the soft soul they tried to distort, but as its evolution, hardened, honed, and reborn through the fire of psychological war. You see, pain does one of two things. It kills the host, or it mutates the host into something unrecognizable to those who administered it. You choose mutation. You chose rebirth. And now the version of you thought they buried walks into rooms with no need for validation, no tolerance for lies, and no patience for emotional pickpocketing. You stopped playing defense and became the consequence they never thought would materialize. The new version didn't resurrect with softness. It came back jagged, surgical, discerning, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. They mourned your old self like a weapon they could no longer use, because the new one, it doesn't beg, it doesn't negotiate, it doesn't flinch, it watches, it calculates, it remembers, and more than anything, it redefines the relationship dynamic, where once you played the role of emotional scaffolding, now you are the architect. They don't know how to speak to this version. Their usual scripts don't land. Their usual guilt traps don't trigger. Because you no longer fear losing them. You've already been through the loss. What's left now is control. The version they tried to kill came back knowing the rules of the game. And once you know the rules, you stop playing for applause. You start playing for power. They don't understand this new quiet in you. The way you don't explain yourself. The way your presence alone feels like an indictment. They thought survival meant you'd return wounded. They didn't expect you to return weaponized. Because you've turned every betrayal into data. You study people now, not to love them, but to understand their thresholds. You pay attention to what they avoid, what they exaggerate, how they flinch under honesty. And you no longer accommodate that fragility. You expose it. People say the past can't hurt you once you've healed. That's a lie. The past still whispers. The difference now is you whisper back. You no longer avoid the old you. They're part of your armory. That version of you they thought was dead now acts as your shadow, watching. Not interfering, but always ready. You bring them into the room like memory in motion. And that unsettles people who expected you to raise your history to make them comfortable. But you don't play small for egos anymore. You walk fully formed, with your scars worn like designer armor. And those scars, they don't scream, they hum, constantly, like a frequency only the guilty can hear. You never sought vengeance. That's the part that confused them most. They expected rage. Instead, they got indifference. You don't shout anymore. You observe. You let them talk and bury themselves in the same lies they once sold to you. The difference now. You document. You don't rescue. You record. That version of you, the one they tried to kill, would have fought to keep everyone close even when it cost peace. But this one walks away without leaving an explanation. Because this version doesn't fear being misunderstood. It trusts that real ones never needed subtitles. You are no longer emotionally bankrupt. You've become your own lender. That's what scares them. You don't need their apologies. You don't seek their remorse. You just operate with a level of self-respect they never thought you'd learn. Your standards are surgical now. You listen with filters. You respond with calculation. You don't just see red flags. You categorize them. And the moment someone tries to repeat history, you don't pause. You exit. That's not arrogance. That's architecture. You're not building connections anymore. You're building empires. And your presence alone now asks the question that once haunted you: do you deserve access to me? The beauty of your evolution is that it doesn't scream revenge. It whispers reality. You've outgrown the need to be liked by people who require your destruction to feel whole. You don't attend battles you didn't declare anymore. You're no longer a target. You're a test. And most won't pass. The version of you they tried to came back more complex, more strategic, more sovereign. Now you move with the awareness of someone who knows exactly who they are, and more importantly, exactly who they're not. And every time someone tries to test you, they're not just facing you. They're facing every lesson that built you. They laughed at your pain, not out of malice alone, but out of comfort. Your suffering made them feel taller. It validated their own delusions. It made their mediocrity seem noble in comparison. And so they laughed, not always with sound. Sometimes it came in smirks, in passive dismissals, in the coldness of their timing. Sometimes it came in silence, strategic, deliberate, cruel. They watched you break open and saw no tragedy in it, just entertainment, just relief that it wasn't them. And they mistook your trembling hands for weakness, your cracked voice for defeat, your silence for surrender. They weren't laughing at your failure. They were laughing at your humanity. And in doing so, they wrote themselves into a chapter you would never forget. You saw it all. The looks, the flinches they couldn't hide, the way they turned your cries into comedy and your breakdowns into whispers passed between mouths too spineless to speak truth. Pain was your teacher, and they turned the classroom into an arena. You became the spectacle, the punchline, the warning sign that said, "Don't become too soft or this could be you." They laughed because your vulnerability scared them, because you felt so deeply and they hadn't felt anything in years, because you broke open publicly while they were rotting quietly. And when someone's rotting on the inside, it's easier to laugh at someone else's fall than to confront their own decay. You remember who stayed quiet while you screamed through your skin, who changed the subject when your name came up, who chuckled at stories carved from your blood. They won't say it now. They'll rewrite the past in soft tones, but your nervous system remembers. Your body recalls the betrayal, not as memory, but as warning. You don't need revenge. You don't even need apology. You've cataloged it all in a place more powerful than proof, in your pattern recognition. Now, every interaction is a scan. Every smile is measured. Every new relationship is filtered through the echoes of the laughter that once danced over your grief. You became difficult after that, not emotionally unstable, unwilling to perform softness for people who confuse vulnerability with submission. You stopped being easy to read. You stopped being easy to reach. And they call you cold now. They say you changed. That's the comedy of it all. They laughed at the pain that melted your old self, and now they mourn the warmth of a version they helped destroy. They want access to what they mocked. They want safety inside a castle they tried to burn. But you remember. And what you remember, you honor. Not with vengeance, but with limits. It wasn't just the laughter. It was what it cost you. It made you doubt your worth. It made you question your sensitivity. You almost swallowed your own depth just to be easier to love. You nearly amputated the best parts of your soul to fit into hands that didn't know how to hold you. But something inside you refused to die. That's the part they didn't count on. The part of you that watched them laugh and deciding this will never happen again. That part isn't dramatic. It isn't loud. It's surgical. It doesn't beg. It builds. And you've been building ever since. Now when you speak, your voice carries edges, not bitterity. You see through performances. You notice the hesitations, the small shifts, the subtle exits people make when discomfort enters the room. You've become fluent in body language, in tone, in unspoken cues. Because once people laugh at your pain, you stop listening to their words. You start reading their energy. And energy never lies. It either leans in or it recoils. And when it recoils, you don't chase anymore. You just observe. And then you walk away like a storm that knows its own worth. You've realized now that their laughter wasn't power. It was a mask. They wore humor like armor because your depth was a mirror they weren't ready to look into. You made them feel shallow. And shallow people would rather mock the ocean than drown in it. So let them laugh. Let them perform. Meanwhile, you've been turning your sorrow into sovereignty. You've turned your vulnerability into discernment. You've become untouchable. Not because you're emotionless, but because your emotions now belong to you and no one else. Your smile is no longer an invitation. It's a boundary. They won't admit it, but they watch you now. Quietly. Closely. Not because they care, but because they fear the echo of what they did. They see your name rise in rooms they never thought you'd enter. They feel the shift when your presence enters a conversation, and their laughter, it's faded. It's nervous now. It stutters. Because laughter only works when the target stays down. But you got back up. Stronger. Sharper, silent. And now the punchline is gone. All that's left is the truth. And the truth doesn't laugh. It levels. You don't forgive for their comfort. You forgive for your freedom. And that's the deepest cut of all. That you moved on. That you healed without announcing it. That you no longer cry in the places they left you bleeding. You've created new memories on top of the graves they left behind. You don't deny the past. You decorate it with power. That's the final scene. The one they never expected. You alive. You glowing. You unbothered. And that sound they hear when your name rises again. That's not your laugh. That's their shame echoing back at them. They planned your exit like amateurs. Sloppy, smug, and short-sighted. They orchestrated the collapse of your name in rooms where you were too absent to defend it. Whispered sabotage dressed in concern. Passive snubs masquerading as professionalism. Emotional exile built through microaggressions, misinterpretations, and carefully curated silence. They assumed you wouldn't notice, that you'd internalize the quiet freeze as your own failure, that you'd slowly dim, trying to win back favor that was never honest to begin with. They believed exile was the end. They never understood that some souls don't fade in isolation. They forge in it. Your absence became your incubation. They confused quiet with compliance. But you weren't surrendering. You were studying. You watched how the knives moved. Not just who held them, but who passed them behind closed doors. You identified patterns, mapped their strategy, dissected their tactics until you could predict their moves with surgical precision. And all the while, they mistook your silence for vacancy. They assumed you'd return pleading or not return at all. But instead, you walked back in with an energy so clean, so composed, it cracked the foundation of every lie they built while you were gone. You didn't come back louder. You came back sharper. Every word you speak now cuts through illusion. Every glance, deliberate. Every movement, intentional. Your very presence edits the air. People shift in their seats when you enter, not out of respect, but out of reckoning. You don't match the version of you they exiled. You've been upgraded, hardened by truth, refined by fire. You return not as a guest, but as the standard. They thought your exit would remove you from relevance, but all it did was remove them from your priorities. And now, your energy doesn't ask for space. It claims it. They played chess while you rebuilt the entire board. You no longer play to win. You play to transform. You don't checkmate people. You redefine what the game means altogether. That's why they're uncomfortable. Not because you came back, but because you came back changed. You're unreadable now. Immune to manipulation. You've erased the manual they once used to control you. Their strategies fail, not because you counter them, but because you no longer participate in that silence. That detachment, it's your most potent form of revenge. You exist beyond their comprehension now. You're not angry. You're evolved. The rooms they once ruled with gossip now bow to your presence. Not because you reclaimed your image, but because you stopped needing one. You don't care to be liked anymore. You came back to be felt. And when you're felt, they don't need to believe the lies. They just sense something has shifted. People who laughed at your absence now watch their tone in your company. They hesitate, because your return wasn't about reunion. It was about reckoning. And you don't scream for validation. You let the atmosphere recalibrate around your silence. The immature quality of their exile plan becomes clear the moment you open your mouth. Your words carry weight they can't lift. You don't debate anymore. You dictate, not from arrogance, but from awareness. You no longer participate in dynamics where your value must be proven. That part of you died in the wilderness they pushed you into. And what came back in its place? Sovereignty, command, elegance born from pain. You walk into their curated echo chambers, and your silence dismantles every illusion, because your truth doesn't tremble anymore. It towers. They didn't prepare for your growth. They only prepared for your grief. That's the fatal miscalculation. They strategized around your pain, not your power. They built plans assuming your weakness would linger, but weakness was the soil, growth was the bloom. And now, you're not seeking to belong. You build spaces. Spaces where people like you never have to explain their presence again. You're not a comeback story. You're the inevitable result of suppressed potential finding oxygen. And now that you've tasted air, you'll never crawl again. It's not about revenge. It's about redefinition. The version of you that once tried to fit in. Gone. Replaced by a version who owns the room without asking permission. You don't wait for recognition. You move like recognition is beneath you. You've become a presence that speaks before you do, and that disturbs them. Because now, the rooms that once rejected you need your name to stay relevant, and that's the most poetic twist of all. The exile was the upgrade. The silence was the syllabus. And you passed the final test by becoming the very energy they cannot replicate. They engineered your downfall like it was a group project. Now, they individually carry the shame of seeing you thrive. You didn't expose them. You exposed yourself fully, finally, and without restraint. And the world responded. People feel your story without hearing it. They feel the edge in your calm, the certainty in your stillness. You don't explain anymore. You exist like evidence, like a living contradiction to every story they tried to sell. And now, your present doesn't just rewrite rooms. It rewrites reputations. Theirs, yours, everyone's. So let them sit in the ruins of the version of you they tried to erase. Let them swallow the irony. You came back cleaner, colder, clearer. You returned with no apologies, no open arms, just truth, unshakable, measured, immovable. And every room you walk into from now on knows one thing before a word is setting this one was supposed to be gone. And now, they're the new center of gravity. They looked clever, didn't they? Pulling strings, whispering threats, making moves with the confidence of someone who thought they saw the full board. And that's the part you almost admire. The confidence. The sheer audacity to believe they were manipulating you while standing on terrain you constructed. Playing a game you rigged before they even learned the rules. Every tactic they thought they invented. You embedded it. Every maneuver they thought would blindside you. You placed it there like a trap disguised as opportunity. They weren't playing chess. They were acting in your design, following rules you authored, mistaking your silence for blindness while failing to realize. This board was yours before they arrived. They paraded their cleverness with pride. Every smug smirk, every half-baked scheme, every illusion of control. It was all theater for you. You watched their hands move pieces with confidence, completely unaware that you'd already calculated every permutation before they even took their first step. You weren't reacting. You were recording. You weren't fighting back. You were feeding their illusion, letting them believe they were creating chaos, when, in reality, They were only following the paths you paved. They thought they were tricking you with strategy. But what do strategies matter in a room where the architect is already 10 layers beneath the game? They didn't realize that intellect alone doesn't terrify you. Amateurs with ambition often mistake cleverness for power. But you know better. You know that power isn't about being smart. It's about being silent long enough for the smart ones to outsmart themselves.